Welcome everybody to our panel, and it's the last panel that I'll be doing for FutureCon. So I'm really excited to be here with the panelists and talking about global trends and predictions for 2022. We've got some interesting topics to cover. And as everybody knows, 2021 was a year that we would like to forget when it comes to cyber attacks. Cyber criminals hone their craft by tapping advanced attack models, while dramatically expanding their impact with a long list of successful attacks on the software supply chain. So we will be talking about that as well today. So without further ado, I'm going to have the panelists come in and we'll have them do their introduction. Great. Hello, everybody. Also, before we get started, I just wanted to remind everybody in the audience to please put your questions in the chat for the panelists, and we'll bring you into the conversation. There won't be an official Q&A at the end. So without further ado, let's start with Jonathan, and please tell everybody who you are and where you work.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Jonathan Fowler. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer at Concilio. We're an electronic discovery and legal services provider. I've been with the company going on 18 years now. I started off, came up through the digital forensics and incident response space, and just kind of worked my way up, was a testifying expert for a while in computer forensics, and then got into security by, simply raising my hand and saying, hey, we don't have anybody that's kind of looking after security full time. And then got the tap to say that's now an additional duty of mine. So that was about 8 years ago, and we've kind of grown the team since then. But thank you for having me today. I'm looking forward to being part of this.
Great. Frank.
Good afternoon. This is Frank Balonis. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer at Kiteworks. I've been working here through the early days, responsible, of course, as Jonathan mentioned, we needed someone to take over on security. We've been doing it for a long time, so that job has also been added to my repertoire of duties here at Kiteworks, and been involved with that for the last 18 years.
Great, thank you very much. And I'm going to throw it to Morgan. I'm sure many of people in the audience know Morgan, who's been on a whole host of things, talked on the news, on Fox News, CNN, has done keynotes here and been on the panels many times. So Morgan.
And anybody who still comes to see me needs mental help. So it's like, I don't know why. So,
what's that say about me?
Well, Morgan Wright, I'm Chief Security Advisor for Sentinel-1. Just by way of background, funny you mentioned that, Jonathan. When I was a detective and a cop, I used to teach computer crime investigation, computer forensics, and spent a year training the FBI on that stuff. Now they've become good at it, and I just suck at it now, so I don't do it anymore. So but like 18 years state and local law enforcement, spent a lot of time inside the government from the private sector as well, but doing stuff with the intelligence and defense communities, and was a senior advisor in the U.S. State Department Anti-Terrorism Assistance Program, ran global programs at Cisco for Public Safety, Homeland Security, and Bell Labs, and then I'm currently a senior fellow at the Center for Digital Government. And so I just enjoy this kind of stuff. So thanks for having me on, and hopefully you guys will stay on to listen, even if you've heard me before. So
you have a lot of stories to tell, which is great. So our topic today is global trends and predictions. And so I'd like to start with, this crazy year we've had, 2021, and what trends you've seen develop now that we're at the end of the year. And a little bit later, we'll talk about predictions for 2022. So I'm going to start with Jonathan. And I know we talked in our prep call, talked about ransomware. And of course, everybody in the audience and who's going to be listening to this has been impacted or, at some point. So talk to us about your thoughts on ransomware.
Yeah, sure, Lorraine. I think, one of the things that I've seen, it's not just this past year, it's kind of been going the past couple of years, but the trend where ransomware has grown into essentially its own business, right? It's become commoditized to the point where, I, as a consumer, can shop around and find the best provider of ransomware services out there, so that if I want to engage in an attack or try to do something to disrupt a company or town, city, state, I can essentially, I can go out, I can do my due diligence, I can read up on reviews, and see which provider has the best customer service, or which one, offers the quickest payment. And I think it's been fascinating to watch this really mature as a business and kind of take on the mentality of a business.
Yeah, that's very true. Frank, what are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts, it seems not only is it commoditized, but the parties involved work together to attack organizations, making it even more difficult to determine cause, where it's coming from. So it keeps me up at night. It definitely has me concerned on a daily basis as we just try to understand where things are happening around the globe and attacking not only your organization but your own customer base. The vendors you just depend on. You never know where it's coming from, and it's coming fast.
It's very true. Morgan.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing we found out from 2021, and even with ransomware, is it's not over. It's not. We're not even, as Winston Churchill said. I think he was talking about the Battle of Britain. It's not the beginning of the end or the end of the beginning, but maybe it's the end of the beginning. I can't quote it like he can. He says it so much better. But I think we're going into another phase, and part of this phase is going to be one of the things I think we saw out of 2021, especially with ransomware, is the implicit approval of attacks by transnational criminal ransomware organizations against critical infrastructure with the implicit approval of state actors like Russia, like China. We know Iran's behind it. We know North Korea's behind it. North Korea and Iran are two state sponsors of terrorism that are actually sometimes do it for the money. Most of the time, things like this are done for intelligence. But the scary thing for me are the tools and techniques that are crafted by state actors because they've got the money, they've got the intelligence, they've got the resources, which then end up in the hands of criminal actors who then, it's the equivalent of saying, I've just built a nuclear bomb. By the way, I got a spare. Here you go. Now you can use it. You're an organization that doesn't have the capability to produce these sophisticated tools. Now you've got them in your hands. So I think we saw a kind of a watershed moment, especially with a Colonial Pipeline. And the last thing here, the thing that struck me about 2021, because it was an attack against critical infrastructure, but it was not a real attack because it did not actually damage critical infrastructure. All it did is prevent the administrative billing of the pipeline system, but we reacted to it as though it was a real attack. And the enduring image is the lady who's putting gas into her plastic bag.
Interesting. Yeah. So let's talk about multifaceted extortion as well. And it's sort of, goes hand in hand with ransomware. But Jonathan, what are your thoughts on that? I know you had brought that up before.
Yeah. So, I think, going back something Morgan touched on, with state actors, kind of with the time, money, resources to craft these tools and pass them along, and you see them being used more and more against private organizations. I think one of the things that these groups have figured out is, before ransomware was, let's get it in, boom, we'll detonate it, everything's encrypted, and we'll go from there.
Yes, and so let's talk about cyber insurance, because it's definitely evolved as a result of ransomware. Anybody I talked to in your role has talked about how it's become a 20-page security document that you have to complete, and it's a very rigorous process. Frank, let's hear from you on cyber insurance.
Yes, so we had to renew our insurance this year, which took quite a bit of time, a lot longer than it has in years past, for obvious reasons. The industry as it is, ransomware attacks, a much more rigorous process. It's very hard to find the right cyber insurance. Some organizations are looking to self-insure to a certain level. Based on that, and it just becomes what used to be, a regular process through an annual renewals is going to be a rigorous process, much like any audit or compliance checks, just to ensure that you can remain insured.
But the difference with this side of it is once it gets to the point of where you can't even predict from an actuarial model the type of impact you're going to have. You see some of the people like over in France, folks have started getting out of it. They said, we are no longer going to provide cyber insurance. You're basically on your own. It's like you can only jack up premiums so high before it makes sense to self-insure. If you live in a flood zone and you get flooded all the time, that's why there's no flood insurance when you live in a flood zone. You have to get special programs. So I think you're going to see this is an economic issue, less of a cyber issue. It's just an economic issue that says if we can't predictably mitigate, and plan against the risk, then the only thing you can do is just get rid of the program that reduces or that, insures against the risk. So I think you'll see cyber insurance just either it's going to go away or it's going to get to the point, like you were just saying, Frank, a 20-page document is going to become a 6-month interrogation with people crawling through your network. And at some point you're going to go, not worth it. We'll just do it ourselves.
I already see it happening. Yeah.
Yeah, and also putting limitations on what technology you can actually use, and just sort of tying your hands as well. So like you're right, Morgan, it gets to a point where it's not worth it.
Well, if you're still running Windows XP and you want insurance, that's probably not going to happen. So,
And you want us to put a hole in ours so you can look at it. That's a good idea.
Well, let's move on and talk about, again, I want to encourage the audience to put your questions in the chat. We'd love to hear some of the trends that you've seen come out of 2021. And we can definitely bring you into the conversation. But we've talked about, obviously, after the pandemic hit, everybody went to work from home, and that looks like it's continuing. And, Frank had an interesting term of saying that running a corporate office from your home. And of course, that presents a whole, batch of issues in terms of securing it. But let's talk about that area, Frank, and we'll start with you.
Sure. Yeah. Once the pandemic hit, everyone had to work from home. And what that means is now you have corporate infrastructure in your house, and you have all of the Internet of Things, your Google Homes, your Alexas. They're all other openings to issues that can be introduced now into your corporate network because you're there. So I fortunately am lucky enough that I have an environment where I have an isolated office for myself, since I've worked from home for many years before the pandemic even started. But you have to be mindful of everything that an employee is doing while working at home. And there's a lot of organizations looking to go back to work and back to the office more frequently, come January, for instance. Kiteworks is looking to do that. But then just as you're thinking of doing that, another variant's out there. So working remotely could be in the foreseeable future.
So Morgan, as a cyber strategic advisor, what would you advise in terms of keeping these corporate offices from home secure?
I mean, what could go wrong when you're working in an environment where your corporate assets are connected to the same network that your connected refrigerator is? I mean, there's absolutely no security holes there between that, your connected TV, Alexa, whatever else. And so I think what it's done is that it's made it, it's like playing three-dimensional chess as opposed to regular chess. I mean, just the different things you have to think about. Now, here's the fallacy we got to be careful, and I'm going to talk about this in a minute about the way we think about problems. But here's the problem people fall into. Well, that will never happen because we do it this way. Never say never. That's when one of these gangs start going, hey, hold my beer, watch this. You came out, you publicly said it. Now we're going to show you it can be done. And so I'm very concerned in terms of things that are in the home that we haven't. Look, the pandemic did a lot of things, and what it did is it exposed flaws in the way we thought we responded. Our business continuity plans, our disaster recovery plans, because everybody says, hey, we're just going to be out of the office for a couple of weeks. How do we operate? Nobody ever planned for a pandemic. That's the thing. That's why they're called disaster recovery plans, not catastrophe recovery plans. And this was catastrophic in the sense is that the supply chain got hit. There weren't enough laptops to go around. There are probably so many ways we could go with this. I just think it's one of those things. I like what you said, Frank. When I worked at Cisco, I haven't been in an office since 2004, but they actually sent equipment, a secure router. You plugged it into your home router. The IP phone ran after that, the same SSID for the wireless secure. I would feel more comfortable about that, but I think a lot of times you don't know what apps are running. Now your phone becomes a primary vector for attack because everybody's connected over the phone. So again, it may be that if they go back to the office, it's less about, hey, we want everybody to come back to the office. And it's more about, man, it's just too tough to try and manage all of these different areas of risk and these different vectors. It's much easier when I can put everything inside a wall.
Jonathan, do you care to comment on that?
Yeah, no, I mean, great points by Frank and Morgan. I think to follow up on both of them, this happened, right? And we moved our entire workforce from corporate offices to their residents. And I think one of the things, we ran into, and it's a challenge, and it's kind of the things, Morgan, you mentioned sending equipment out. That's great. I can send a router out, I can send in everything. But if I live with two roommates, then I've got two other people that, my company now has to figure out how to architect my home network in such a way that my roommates, I've minimized the risk of them possibly having access to any of my devices or anything. It's a challenge to move to a complete remote workforce mindset, not just, from an architectural perspective, but look, frankly, the economic impact of it, if you're saying, do we send routers out to everybody?
Yeah, so we've, this last year we've updated, moved to a new platform for our awareness training. Like most organizations, you have your awareness training as you come on board. You provide it on a regular frequency, which was annual before this year. What we're looking to do now with this new platform is to do it in smaller pieces, whether it's every month, once a quarter, smaller amount of training in a more frequent basis. And the reason that I'm doing this is looking at the trends in our help desk, talking with the head of IT. We see that after that training, that everybody is always hesitant, always trying to put it off, not do it, think it's not worth it. We always see a definite increased awareness in possible phishing and scam emails and reporting back to us. And so it shows that awareness training does provide that value, and doing it once a year is just not effective anymore. So we're gonna provide a more frequent basis for the training, just to keep the base level higher of awareness.
So Morgan, what are you seeing from kind of emerge from 2021 around the people side of things?
The fact that I can't train my cats, that's the only thing I can figure out right now. No, look, I used to teach interview and interrogation behavior analysis. I spent time teaching out at the National Security Agency. And if anybody says that they think that you can train, people should never be the first line of defense. And we treat that too much. Humans are not, in this day and age, they are not constructed to be the first line of defense against attacks that are now increasingly using artificial intelligence, machine learning, that are, when quantum computing comes out, can you imagine that, what it's going to be able to do? So I think what we have to do is start realizing is that it has a place. And the reason I talked about the interview interrogation, humans are the weakest link in everything. The number one tactic that's used by state actors like Russia, like China, is spear phishing. The first big attack, the use of dark energy against Ukraine and the Zaporizhzhia hydroelectric plant, on the Dnieper River, which, by the way, it's the second time the Russians attacked that. First time was World War II. It was a spear phishing email crafted to look like it come from the Ukrainian Parliament with a spreadsheet on there that said enable macros. And in spite of everything, what did the person do? They enabled macros, and this contributed to the attack. So I think one of the lessons we're going to learn is that we've got to get to the point to where our automation and our systems need to be so good at getting rid of almost everything. What we ought to be doing is be training for those things that if it makes it past this, we need to be looking for fewer things, not more things. The more you tell humans to try and look for more things, the less they're going to find. It's just the way that they're constructed.
Jonathan.
Yeah, no, I mean, great points again, all around. I mean, I think, one thing to follow up on the training aspect, I mean, it's a behavioral thing now. And I think what we've seen, we run annual training, and I can tell you that if we had a daily sentiment score for security, as that annual training approaches, our sentiment score would start to plummet because people, the month before it happens, people start to think, oh, okay, well, next month's the annual training, and then it gets rolled out, and then you have 30 days to finish your training. Okay, I've got 30 days. And then it's human nature to just kind of push it off. And then it's, okay, I have to get this done, or some kind of punitive action is going to be taken against me, right? So I'm going into my annual training, hating the guys giving me the training anyway, because I have to do it or else I'm going to get in trouble. Like, I'm not doing it because, I want to learn and I want to be able to at least somewhat identify some of these threats out there. You see the wrong mindset going in. And while there is a bump, Frank mentioned the bump, sure, after you do an annual training, you see a bump in reported emails and suspicious activity, and people are kind of on heightened awareness for about a month, and then it starts to wane again. And I know one of the things we discussed yesterday, is there a frequency? Do you do it quarterly then? Do you take a 1 hour annual training and make it 15 minutes every quarter, and then sell it to people as, hey, it's only 15 minutes now?
That's true. Good. So I haven't seen any trends coming in from the audience. So let's shift gears a little bit and talk more about predictions, going into 2022. And I'm going to start with Morgan here to kind of kick that off and talk about what you see happening or coming our way in 2022. I mean, you've touched on a few things anyway, but
Yeah, a couple things. First of all, I think you will see 2 to 3 major intelligence operations like we saw with SolarWinds and what the Chinese did with Office 365. Those are already in progress. I mean, those are happening as we speak right now. There is a major intelligence operation, and as a result, those tools will then fuel the use by transnational criminal organizations who then employ those tools to attack enterprises, and everybody else. So I think we will see, as with anything, 2 to 3 more intelligence operations. I think the other thing you'll see too is as automation starts approaching, a lot more use in terms of the defense against the network, machine speed attacks deserve machine speed responses. Then I think what you're going to see is more use of zero-day exploits and novel zero-day exploits. And so I think that's going to become a huge issue because, as we saw with Pegasus and NSO out of Israel, the ability to just do zero-touch infections on a Safari mobile browser and have complete access to your network, to everything else. So I think that's one of the key issues there. But the thing I want to talk about, though, is when everybody talks about SolarWinds and all this other stuff, it was less a failure of technology and cybersecurity. It was more a failure of the way we think about the problem. So the problem isn't the problem. The problem is the way we think about the problem. And that's not even what counts. It's the way our adversaries think about the problem.
That's good. That's the good intrigue. And we will definitely come back to that. Jonathan, let's feel free to comment on Morgan.
How do I follow that?
No.
I don't know where to begin.
Oh, you mean the inviting me at the last minute? This is what you get?
No, I think I'll touch on one of the things Morgan brought up, and that's that there are intelligence operations going on now by nation state actors, and that those tools, tactics, techniques will trickle down to transnational criminal organizations, domestic criminal organizations. And I think, one of the things, as we see that trickle down, right, something that, always concerns me is, I see we work with a lot of vendors who are small and medium businesses. They provide services to us. As a smaller, medium-sized business, from a business perspective, it makes sense for me sometimes to outsource a lot of my operations, maybe my IT operations. A managed IT service provider is a great business value to an SMB, but you start to look at that, that's also a very juicy target for any one of these transnational organizations, domestic organizations to go after. A service provider that has access to the networks, to the infrastructure of multiple companies, because that's what they do. That is their service. That's a great target to get in. And now you have access to multiple targets. I touched earlier about going in and understanding the lay of the land. If I can get into one of these IT service providers, now I have access. Maybe I've got 15 companies that they provide services for. And I'll just sit there as a criminal intel operation. Let me look at this company. Let me look at this company. Which one's the biggest target for me? Where's the easiest money to be made? And that concerns me because if it's one of those vendors that provides services to me, that's where you start getting into the vendor evaluations and not just your vendors, their vendors, and how do they vet security for their vendors, and kind of so on and so forth. So you get third, fourth, fifth level security reviews. And it just, I don't see that ending anytime soon. In fact, I see it becoming kind of more stringent.
Yeah, actually, we have a question or a comment from the audience. The comment is proxy-based networks will be targeted. I believe there will be major breaches and no one will know who did it. So I don't know if anybody wants to comment on that or validate it, sort of, a little bit of
Well, both of them, Frank and Jonathan, talked about it too. I mean, we place an inordinate amount of trust in these service providers that we're supposed to give unfettered access to our network to.
Yep. Frank, let's hear from you on this topic and could talk about the vendor security requirements as well.
Absolutely. We, as Jonathan mentioned, the frequency, the depth of interrogation, so to speak, of your own vendors. Not only are we doing that to our vendors, but we see all of our customers doing that as a service provider as well. We're seeing a huge uptick in the frequency and the depth of these, and it's not going to go anywhere. It's going to become very similar to standards aren't met anymore. Every organization has their own list of things that they need to know and understand. And your SOC 2s and your ISO certifications don't meet those requirements in any way. That's just one question on the entire questionnaire that you did your ISO certification.
Jonathan,
You're smiling. You want to be a bank robber. You want to be a pirate with me.
Yes, I mean it seems very just like relevant and straightforward. That's what we should be doing.
But we're not. You
Yeah.
know why? Because we have no way of measuring that. We have ways of measuring a scorecard. We check the box. To too many people, success is about the process, not about the outcome. Well, we follow the process. How many projects in government have failed simply because they followed the process as opposed to focusing on the outcomes?
Jonathan.
Yeah, no, I agree totally. I want to go back to one of the things you mentioned. The solution cannot be more frameworks or more specialized frameworks, ISO, SOC, CMMC, PCI. We're going to suffocate ourselves with these frameworks because what it'll turn into is we'll all have to start employing teams of people just to make sure we're compliant with one of the plethora of frameworks, not just in the US, but global. Go over UK Cyber Essentials, pick your country. There's some framework there that you'll have to follow, and that doesn't make any of us more secure. I agree totally, Morgan. It has nothing to do with making us more secure. It has to do with, if I want to do business with the government, ISO, okay, SOC, check, CMMC, yep, you've checked all the boxes. We bless you, you're secure, good to go.
Frank.
I agree. Unfortunately, we're in a state of mind right now where we're forced to do these things. But you look at all of these frameworks; they all say the same thing in a different order, and it's really not adding to anything.
Yeah, and actually we've got a couple comments here. So one more about the supply chain and the vendor security. So given current contractual conventions, most don't have the ability to assess the 4th, 5th, and nth level vendors. Do you think there are better ways to understand the security practices of our vendors? Morgan.
There's actually an easy way, but it wouldn't be very popular. I simply say, you want to do business with me, these are our requirements. Anybody that you bring on board, you are absolutely responsible for, and we will put you out of business if through your failure something happens to our network. So can we say HVAC, in Target or things like that? Does that sound extreme? Yeah, but again, it goes back to what are we doing? I mean, how much visibility can you have? I think of the Department of Defense. Do you know how many contracts? There's a prime contractor, then there's a subcontractor, then a sub to the sub, and then a sub to the sub to the sub. I mean, how far down do you go realistically to ensure? Because then what happens is all your productivity is wrapped up in ensuring compliance with something, and you spend zero time on actually delivering what you've been hired to deliver. So therefore you have a cost overrun. So it justifies you going back to the government to get more money to do more of the same thing that caused the cost overrun in the first place.
Yeah, Jonathan.
I think, to go back to the original question a little bit, at some point there is some level of trust that has to be extended. I don't want to go like completely meta, but there's a foundational element of trust in society that if we don't have it, we stop functioning, properly as a society. So at some point, I would love to do what Morgan says and go to my vendor and say, you know what? I don't really care who you use. Here are my requirements. You're on the hook for it. The lawyers then get involved and say, no. You can't hold us responsible for what our vendors do. That's a separate organization. So we're not going to sign off on that. And that's where we start running into some of these issues. I don't know contractually how you get the lawyers to agree on that. But I think at some level, I always like to sit down with whoever at our vendors are responsible for security.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing, right? You keep things secure, but at the risk of bringing the business to a halt, and you can't do that. I know Charles Carmichael from Mandiant is on our panels quite a bit, and he also testifies in front of Congress, and he says that they talk a lot about being able to come together and and communicate and figure things out together. So sitting down and talking to your vendors, having a conversation. But like you said, Morgan, you got to lay the law down, because you are going to be held liable, right, and responsible for what happens. So there's got to be some coming together to figure that out. Frank, I'll give you a chance to talk, and then I want to bring in any other questions from the audience, and then we'll get ready to wrap up our conversation.
Sure. So, to Jonathan's point, our customers, prospects, I'm always offering a chance to talk to them, to make sure they understand where we sit on security and compliance, because as you mentioned, the continuous questions, the in some cases the ridiculous questions and requirements that just can't be met, that it's obvious that it's part of their standard that they either talk to every vendor to go through these topics, or they have vendors that are just checking a box and actually not even paying attention to what's on that questionnaire.
Very good. So Morgan, you're probably going to say something, but let's just kind of wrap this things up. And if you want to have some closing comments here about trends and prediction, no, we're going to go right with you, Morgan. Let's have the panelists give their final thoughts. And so if anybody else from the audience wants to bring in a question, do it now. So Morgan.
I just look, we've got to rethink everything we do. Everything has to be on the table. Everything too, from the role of lawyers involved in all of this, because I got to tell you, love them. There is a place for them. But when you get so wrapped up in the legalities of thing that business is impeded, I used to call our legal team the business prevention department, because it made it very difficult to do. And I get it that there's risk, but I think we have overcomplicated things to the point where it's tough to do business and get down to doing things right. We've got to start looking at how we simplify things, because if you can simplify things, make things as simple as possible, but no simpler. That's what Einstein said. I think we've got to get back to doing that. And I like what you said too, both Jonathan, Frank, about talking with folks and collaborating. But that, again, that's also time intensive, right? How many people can you have a conversation with and do that? So my big thing is, I think what we ought to do is dedicate, and I know you say you don't have the time, but I think you need to take the time. Frank, you and Jonathan, I'm giving you this time. You go back and tell your folks, you need to take one afternoon, at least every other week, 4 hours, and do nothing but stare into space and think about what are we doing and how can we do things differently. You will never come up with an original thought if you are tasked and working on things from 6 in the morning until 6 at night. There is no way for you to sit back and actually think about the problems that need to be solved. That is not a technical issue. I think our biggest thing we're going to deal with coming up is dealing with the issue of people and how we think about the problem. Because to your point, Jonathan, you know why that 19-year-old found the system? Because he's got nothing else to do but sit and look for that one thing while you're busy fighting fires. He's just looking for the one little chink in your armor, because we don't spend enough time thinking about, if I were a 19-year-old, what would I be looking for? And start thinking about the problem differently. So last thing, the problem isn't the problem. The problem is the way we think about the problem. And guess what, folks? That doesn't matter at all. The real problem is the way our adversaries think about the problem. And until we start thinking like them, we will keep spending money in this vicious circle and keep getting the same results we've got over the past 10 years. So I don't see things getting any better until we change how we think.
That is very well said and very true. And the saying goes, if you don't disconnect, you'll never find inspiration. Frank, final thoughts here.
My final thoughts are,
he's taken off. He's gone for 4 hours now.
Morgan just told me I could take 4 hours off. So you guys have a nice day, because I have to ponder off into space and think about. I agree with Morgan on that 100%. I know working from 6 to 6 or 6 to 10 sometimes, as we talked earlier, you just don't have time to actually think of the problem at hand. You're just constantly answering emails, making phone calls, and working on the task, on the fluff. Really, you're not really getting down to thinking about what can we do differently. Where can we focus on? I'm constantly chasing that next framework or questionnaire or talking to a customer, and it's all there. It's all true.
That's very true. Jonathan.
Yeah, you know what? I think one thing, and I'll follow up on something that Morgan mentioned. This concept, machine level attacks, AI attacks deserve a response or protection. Machine level protection, AI protection. I think that is the way of the future. That's the way as kind of security leaders I'd like to see us go, because it's going to be easier. The nation state actors can do it. That technology will get out and will become easier for private groups to use, or it'll be fed to them. But that level of attack is coming. And, I mean, I don't think it's a shock that a lot of organizations are woefully underprepared for that level of attack to come. And so the adoption, the gradual adoption, or quick if you can do it, of kind of machine level defense where you're able to counter someone that's throwing just raw computing power at you, you're able to counter that with your own power, I think is going to be important.
Very good. This has been a great discussion. Always fun to look at what's coming basically in 2022. I know we've got some great comments from the audience. So with that, we'll close out and say thank you to all the panelists for contributing and bringing your time and knowledge here. And with that, we'll throw it back to FutureCon, who I think now we're going to go to a break, and want to encourage everybody that's attending to visit the vendor virtual rooms. And I know that everybody's got a lot of free giveaways and a lot of good technology that they can discuss with you. So with that, we'll end the session and we'll see you next year.